Hey you guys, Joel Viets here of DeepWater Tanks. So I'm glad you're here to join me today. For this first episode, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to dive into just what it takes to have an aquarium. I want this to be a video series that is good for you guys, both in just learning the ins and outs from my 20 plus years of experience dealing with this, but also if you're new to this hobby, I want to be able to give you a straightforward plan of what you should really be watching out for before you invest a ton of money into this and decide, do I want to do this or was it worth it, and feel like you've just wasted a bunch of money. So for starters, I'm Joel. I've had aquariums in my life, whether they would be terrariums or actual aquariums, for over 20 years now. Started with reptiles and amphibians, grew up being kind of thinking I'd be the next crocodile hunter. That's even what I wanted to go to college for, and loved every minute of it. But it wasn't until I got to my high school and early college years I decided, I think I'd like to do fish instead of reptiles and amphibians so much. I still love them, I'd still keep them if I could, but fish were just a little bit more peaceful and relaxing for me to watch, and a little cheaper once you get everything set up how you want. Now, starting out, I had many different aquariums. My earliest memory is probably the 55 gallon, like this one behind me, that my dad had in our basement of our first house. It was a big, nasty aquarium filled with pond fish. And anytime we went fishing or seining or doing stuff in our local area here in southeast Kansas, we would take anything really cool that we caught and toss it in the tank and watch how it worked. And I don't remember what even happened with all those fish or that tank because it was so long ago. But that really planted a seed kind of in me, just thinking how cool it was to have that. It wasn't until my college years that I really got into having more tanks because they're just peaceful. Just look at these guys floating about. I love it. You don't have the issues with fish that you do with lizards and snakes and stuff. And where other stuff can get out of the cages and go for who knows how long throughout your house until you have to chase it down and find it, these guys really can't get out of the tank. And if they do, they can't go far. So I've started and had a number of different tanks growing up. And I started, small size and worked my way up. And I loved every minute of it. You can have a lot of fun with anything from your 5-gallon tank all the way up to your 180-gallon tank. But here's what I want you guys to watch out for. I want you to find what you can handle and what you can afford. It does you no good to think, I want a Bass Pro sized aquarium if you have no room for it and you don't have the money to take care of it and afford it. Find one that fits kind of in your niche of what you can afford and what you have space for. Find fish that will fit in that tank, because not all fish will stay small. Some of these guys will stay a little tiny, and then in some of my other tanks, I have fish that will easily get past that 3-foot mark given enough time. In fish, a lot of them are very long-lived. Like some people think, oh, fish will die in a year. Well, some of these can outlive your dog. Some of these can outlive some people, honestly, depending on the fish. So I would love to be able to just walk you through some of this so you'll know what to watch out for and what there is to this hobby. So starting out, having a small aquarium is great. Don't think in any way, shape, or form that having a small tank is like disappointing, like you need a bigger showy tank. This is about you. This is what you want. You just need to find that and go for it. Whether it's a 5-gallon tank with shrimp and a few guppies in it and some snails, or as I said, like a 180-gallon tank. That was a bridge that took me a long time to cross because I thought it would be very cool to have one of those. But when you're younger, most of the time you don't have the time, effort, and knowledge to get one of those. So here behind me, we have a 55-gallon planted tank. I've cleaned up the glass, got it pretty well viewable for you guys to enjoy. But aquariums, as I said, they take work, they take maintenance. If you think you're just going to get a tank and have to put no effort into it, you're not going to be very happy with your tank. There's a lot of things that go into making a well-balanced, pretty and clean aquarium. Right now it's pretty quiet in here. It's because I have the filters turned off. But there's a few things you just have to realize you're going to need for your aquarium. Probably the biggest things right off the bat that cost you the most will be the tank, the light, the heater. It's back there on the right. You may not be able to see it. And then I have 2 filters in here. That's where most of your money will go starting out. The fish aren't that expensive. There are some out there that are that expensive, but these guys aren't. Like, we've got guppies, flagtails, let's see, there's actually a trio of pea puffers in here, a bunch of cherry shrimp that may be hard to see, as well as, let's see, I've got a hillstream loach, Siamese algae eater, and then also, let's see, some odos and some American flagfish. I think that's about everybody that's in here. Now, these guys are great. This is more or less a peaceful tank. Honestly, the pea puffers should not be in there. They are fin nippers, and as we go through and learn about all these aquarium fish, you have to learn what will and won't work together. You don't want to get fish that will eat each other, unless you want predatory fish, and that's what you're getting into this for. But I have that in another tank. This tank was a tank I set up for my wife. Peaceful, relaxing, not much to it other than just some pretty little guppies and a few little community fish. And yeah, I just wanted it to be a tranquil little aquarium that we could enjoy. Now, as we've moved stuff around in our house, this has become the guest room aquarium. And as the guest room has moved, that's been a challenge for us to deal with. A 55-gallon tank is a fairly good size aquarium, especially if you live in a house where you're, say, an apartment building, somewhere you're trying to figure out where you can put a tank like in your home, because that's a lot of weight. There's probably 500 pounds here. 55 gallons of water at 8 pounds a gallon, probably at least 50 pounds of sand, a bunch of rocks, a bunch of decorations, the stand, the light, the tank. That adds up to be a lot of weight and a lot of work. Now, you can have smaller tanks than this. I've got smaller tanks. I love the smaller tanks. They all have a purpose, and it all depends on how much work you want to put into it. Now, what I want you to realize, what you get out of this hobby will be what you put into it. If you want a big, gorgeous tank, there's going to be a fair bit of work that goes into that. If you want a small, simple aquarium, that takes some work, but not as much. So first thing first, you need to kind of think and daydream of what you want in an aquarium. Now, I know walking into the pet store can be, I'm not going to say overwhelming, but it's like, wow, look at all the options. You want one of everything. That's a terrible way to go about it. And most pet stores are really, really good about recommending what you should and shouldn't have together. The problem is there are some out there where either A, people don't know what they're talking about, and they just want to say, oh yeah, that'll work. You can definitely get that that Oscar to put in your 5-gallon tank. It'll grow to the size of the tank. That's a myth. Fish don't work like that. Fish will outgrow a tank, and that's a very simple thing you just have to realize. It's a way of life. They do not grow to be the size of their aquarium. They will grow to be the size that they were genetically dispositioned to be. Guppies, these guys stay small. I don't think I have anything in here that actually gets big. Probably the biggest thing in here will be the American flagfish, these guys right here, when they're fully grown. And by then, I'll have them in another tank too, because they will be eating stuff in here. The shrimp would disappear if I kept them in here. When it comes to what it would take to keep your aquarium running, you need to price kind of what you think you can afford and look at what you're going to need. As I said, you're going to need a tank, heater, filters, and a light. That's just kind of a given that you're going to need for any tank. That covers no sand, that covers no decorations. All of that stuff can be expensive. And planted tanks in themselves are work. They take just as much work as the fish, because plants have needs as well. You have to give them nourishment, you have to fertilize them. It's kind of like taking care of your yard in that sense. If you want your yard to look nice, what do you have to do? You have to work at it. Well, same thing with an aquarium. This tank has actually gone through quite a bit of changes and cleaning in this last few days. I had a whole wall of Java moss that was kind of drowning out some of the Java fern underneath right here, and I cut a lot of that back, because some of these things you can actually make money with. Like, I sell some of my plants, not out of this tank. I have my aquaponics set up in the garage, but I'll grow plants out and sell those to people locally or trade them into the pet store. There's always a good chance that you can do that with your local pet store if you get to know them. A lot of times they'll say, yeah, we'll trade stuff in for credit for you. Or if you're really lucky, maybe they'll even pay you cash for that. I don't know. Mine doesn't, but they know I'm always in there getting fish anyhow, so it works out. So the next thing I want to talk about with you guys is, as you dive into this, You want to know how big of a tank you can handle or how big of a tank you can afford. Look at where you want an aquarium. Do you have room for a 4-foot long, 500-pound tank? I mean, this thing takes some time to maintain. It probably took me a good 45 minutes for this tank, realistically every week or every other week, to keep it maintained and up and running. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a ton of time, but how much time do you want to invest? Like, I have over 500 gallons worth of aquariums in our house. I can spend half of a Saturday maintaining all of those. And probably the biggest challenge is water changes. Because for a 55-gallon tank with a 5-gallon bucket, that's a lot of 5-gallon buckets of trips of water, hauling water out to dump and then bringing water back to dump back in. Now, there are some ways around that. My big tank, my 180-gallon, I have a pump that I just plop right in there that has a hose, and it pumps all the water outside. And then when I'm done, I hook that hose up to our garage faucet in the garage out there, get the water temperature right, pump water back in, and fill the tank back up and add my dechlorinator. That's not a big deal. It just takes time. So that is one of the things you really have to be aware of, because taking care of fish, it's not that hard. It just takes a little bit of food, a little bit of effort. Right now, the filters are turned off right here, so it'll be quiet enough you can hear me over them. But most aquarium filters make a little bit of noise. If you love to have a totally silent bedroom so you can sleep, but you think you want a fish tank, you may want to reevaluate that, because it'll do you no good to get a tank and realize, hey, I can't stand the noise. And some aquariums are louder than others. Now, that has nothing to do with the tank, but everything to do with the equipment. So that's something you have to keep in mind as well. If you want like a totally silent aquarium, that takes a little bit more money and a little bit more effort. All right, so you guys, as I said a little bit ago, going into the fish store, looking at fish, you need to decide what kind of fish you want. There is a world of different kind of fish out there. You've got everything from your peaceful fish, which is most of the fish in this tank, to some that are a little more semi-aggressive, which they can be nippy with certain things that they just either don't like, they're picky, or they'll try and eat anything that's around them that's small enough to fit in their mouths, to fish that are very aggressive. Now, you can't keep really aggressive fish with peaceful fish, because it will either stress them out, and the aggressive fish will kill them just from stress, because stress will kill a fish. Or they will simply tear them up and eat them. I really hope you guys don't jump into a first fish that's like that. Always start with something you're comfortable with and something that you think you can handle and maintain. If it's your first fish, don't go buying a $600 Zebrina pike cichlid. Gorgeous fish, but they cost a ton of money, and if you have them die on you, you're going to feel terrible about that. So fancy guppies, that is something that is a simple starter fish, and they breed readily. Like, if you look, I've got a ton of fry swimming around in here. And the reason most of these fish are in here is over the winter, my aquaponics set up out in the garage, it was just getting too cold even with the heaters in it without dumping a ton of energy into trying to heat it all. So I brought the fish inside. So these guys, or most of them, will move back out into that setup here shortly. But you have to find a fish that kind of meets what you want. Now, most people, they want a peaceful community fish tank that looks pretty, is attractive, and the fish are interactive. This can be more fun than watching a TV, realistically. You don't have to dump a ton of money to have a nice tank, but you do have to have the basics. Now, most fish need tropical temperature waters. That's 72 to maybe 80 degrees, depending on the fish. Some fish need it that high or even a little warmer, depending on the fish. Now, everything I have in here is pretty well peaceful. Got a few guys who are troublemakers, but for the most part, everybody gets along. So just finding what it is that you want is the first step. So, as I said, look at that spot you have for an aquarium and decide how big you can go. Because depending on how big the tank is, will depend on what filters you need, what kind of heater you need, and how big the light for it needs to be. Now, the bigger stuff gets, the more expensive it gets very quickly. Have that in mind. A 29-gallon tank, that's what most of my starter tanks were. Perfectly sized little aquarium. You can even do like a 20 long, which is is better. Most fish actually prefer to have a longer tank than a taller tank because it gives them more room to swim. Now, guppies, on that regard, they swim through all layers of the tank. Not a big deal. They just love as much tank as you can give them. But that's been this first episode, just to kind of get your toes wet and get you thinking about what it is you're interested in. If you think you're in love with this idea of having an aquarium and you're ready to go out and get one, bring it home, fill it with water and toss fish in, probably not the best idea right off. Aquariums take time, both to build up and establish. If you go out and buy all of your dream fish and throw them in the tank immediately upon getting home, chances are they probably won't all survive. That has to deal with something called beneficial bacteria. As you have your tank, you have to let it set up and establish itself before you put all the fish you want in it. Now, this is a slow progression. It can take a few weeks to, I've seen some people it take nearly a couple of months, depending on the size of tank. Now, that's something you really have to account for because, again, you can't throw it all together over a weekend. If you do, chances are it may not all work out as you want. Does you no good to spend all the money on this, buy all this expensive stuff, and then the fish, and then you see the fish die before your eyes. So that's another thing you really have to watch out for. Cycling an aquarium. If you don't know about it, look it up. But here's the thing. When it comes to building up a tank, fish produce waste, whether there's the poop and the pee, the urine and the water from them, because it's an enclosed system. They swim in it all. All of that will build up in the tank itself, and broken down food, the food that they miss, will also turn to ammonia. Now, these are all things that are toxic to fish. Now, the reason they don't just die in the wild is there's so much dilution, there's so much water there, there's so many things that are in that established environment soaking up those bad things, the plants, that it makes it healthy for the fish because it sucks all the bad stuff out of the water. That's one of the things I love about a planted tank. They can help ease you into a cycle. They can help stop a little bit of the crash from happening if things go wrong, because they're really good at soaking up all the things that would be toxic for your fish. So the nitrate cycle, that's a huge one. We're going to learn about that a little bit more in our next video. So that's something I want you guys to be able to see and know about. And as we move deeper into this hobby, I hope that this has been productive and good for you. And we'll see you on the next episode.